Public policy practice is a very new practice to India, and Tabrez is working towards to promote the public law policy practice among the young lawyers and the already senior, so that we have one public policy law section, and Tabrez chairs that section. So may I introduce you to Tabrez. Tabrez is a Secretary General of OPPI, of Association of Pharma Companies. Pharma companies, particularly in MNCs, they are in number in 49. Previously, he has worked in Microsoft before joining OPPI. He has been responsible for the piracy initiative, IP regime, tech neutrality, and setting up technical standards. As I remember, he is also software engineer.
I think leave it now.
Yeah.
That's good enough introduction. Thank you very much. So let's start. So I'm really happy to have such a good panel, organizers have put it. So on my right, I have Krishna. Krishna is managing partner of Corporate Law Group. The law firm specializes in corporate law, litigation, commercial trade, IPR practice, and most important, many verticals. So what we will be hearing from Krishna will be cutting across many sectors: pharmaceutical, biologics, food, wine and spirit, oil and gas, heavy engineering, shipping. And by the way, she was also associate additional advocate general of Assam. So we look forward to hearing from you. Further on my right is Gaurav. Gaurav is basically a physician and public health specialist from Delhi University and Harvard. He has also a specialization in financing from London School of Hygiene and Tropicological Medicines. By the way, he is also pursuing law. So I don't know what you have left, Gaurav. He works for Lilly and heads corporate affairs. To my left is Rajeev, a good friend. He is a founding member and president of Public Affairs Forum of India, one of the very unique institution in public policy. He has 33 years of experience. He works for Hindustan Unilever Limited, and most important, he is doing his PhD in business administration. Further to left is Yolynd. Yolynd is country director for BSA, and BSA is basically a software publishers association. So you name them: Microsoft, Adobe, Intel, Symantec. You name those companies in software and technology. All of them are Yolynd's BSA member. She has management in innovation from Cardiff Business Law, UK. So we will be looking forward to a lot of public policy issues in tech sector. Further to left is Arvind. Arvind works for ANI Technologies, which will not make much sense to you guys, but the moment I say it's Ola Taxi, it will make a lot of sense. And when I explain further about, this is a new emerging economy company. And emerging economy is when, due to lack of resource, there are a better way of utilization of resources. And this is so important when the population, the world population is increasing, resources are under pressure. What Ola is trying to do, what new emerging economies is trying to do. But just to introduce further, he has a degree in Sanskrit literature, MBA in finance, master in corporate law. He has worked at many places: FICCI, PhD Chamber of Commerce, Metro Cash and Carry, and he has written a number of books. So ladies and gentlemen, so that's the panel I have. What I intend to do is quickly set the context, and then I will throw some question to all the panelists, and I will request them to give the solution and how the public policy can be done better. So if we look at India, for example, or any emerging economy, it's hugely challenging area because it cut across many sectors, it cut across many spatial skills, and looking at the emerging countries where understanding about public policy itself is a challenge, and there is a lack of resource, lack of understanding, lack of capacity, it's hugely a challenge. If I add more complexity, like all the public policy has global ramification, it becomes further difficult. So having said this, let me throw some questions, and then I will request each member to respond. So India has moved a lot from earlier the license Raj, where there was no transparency, there was no consultation. It was decided somewhere in the ministry, and a permit was given to industry and business. Now it's RTI, the age of RTI. So India has moved a lot, but have we achieved everything? Probably no. So my question is, from license Raj to RTI, we have moved a lot, but what is to be done for empowerment of every stakeholder in the country to have right consultation, to have right transparency, to right way of making policy which is good for everybody? So that's my first question. I open it, and maybe any one of you can go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Tabrez, for setting the context. I think I would just like to start with a disclaimer that I'm not a legal expert, so please discount if there's anything wrong that I say. But having worked in the policy domain for close to 15 years, I realized that the interface between law and policy is very close, which is often discounted by most of the people who are in the policy making process. Very often what happens is that a policy is drafted by one particular body, passed through various channels, and finally, when it's about to be passed, somebody says, oh, we haven't taken the legal department's approval. And then they rush the file to the legal department. Legal department, on the other hand, is completely blindfolded to where this policy is coming from. So with whatever information the legal department has, it reviews the policy basically to understand that it shouldn't have any serious repercussions subsequently, and then approves the policy. But that disconnect between the policymakers and the legal experts comes out when it begins being implemented. And that's where I think all of us here can empathize with the condition of those who are affected by it. So policy by definition is a statement of intent. It's not a law, it's not a rule, but it's implemented through a set of rules. And that's where the understanding of the legal processes and what the Constitution overall compels us to do needs to be there. So just as what Jethmalani sir mentioned in the morning, it needs to have reason and logic behind the implementation. And that's what we often find missing in the policies that come out because of this disconnect. And this is the gap that we are all trying to address through various forums. And I think this whole initiative of starting the policy and law group is really commendable in the sense that we bring these two things together and see where there are gaps and try to address these gaps. And, Krishna has been working extensively on such matters as well and would be able to give you a better perspective of how things can be done better. But whatever little understanding I do have of legal affairs and law, I realize that a lot of times we overstep what is constitutional. So for example, I would just like to quote one of the statements of some of the guidelines of the policymakers. It says, and it's just an example to set the context, it says that you need to submit a data pertaining to something. So I won't go into the specifics because of confidentiality. And non-submission of data would be viewed seriously. and you have to submit this data within 7 days, failing which appropriate action will be taken under the provisions of such and such act, read with such and such act, for non-compliance on the letter. And this letter apparently is not served to the respondent. It doesn't say what is appropriate action. So all of you who are legal students would recognize that such a letter actually would not stand the test of law. Would not, in the judiciary, it would not be appropriate. But these things happen all the time. And these are the things we are trying to address through this interface. And I'm sure we would be able to better contribute to that with a mutual understanding. And I think what we also need to initiate is improving the understanding of policymakers regarding the constitution and the judicial process itself. And that's where these gaps could be addressed as we go along. So Krishna, maybe with that.
Thank you. Just to add to what Gaurav said, I have been working in this area since about 1998, and I can see the change in the government's consultation process, where there was almost negligible to none. Now you actually have a process where stakeholders' comments are invited. It goes through a process of comments, and then it is understood that when a government policy or a regulation or law is being made, there are competing interest groups. So obviously, the government cannot take in all the interest groups' point of view into the final product. But the transparency with which the process has gone through now is certainly very commendable. And you mentioned the RTI. So I think since the RTI regime did come in, there is far more information available to you and I to access and actually know what is going on in the internal workings of the government. So I think it is a huge step forward. There was this my experience has been at the center. So this is really, I'm talking about how central laws and central policies are being framed. But I can tell you that the experiences with state governments have been very iffy. Depending on the state governments and the governance level, you would have some level of, taking into account stakeholders' comments, etc., being open to the public comments. But in a lot of cases and in very fundamental decisions, actually the stakeholders and NGO community is actually not taken into account at all. For example, one of the things that I was involved in was in the Arunachal Pradesh-Assam border, and all the hydroelectric power projects that were kind of willy-nilly given with huge environmental impact. And there was no process of consultation at all. And as a result, what you have is today, the power projects never kind of came through. It's huge, public protests that continue. So if that process of consultation was done prior to, such a mega project, not only projects actually being started, the outcome would have been fairly different.
Hello. Yeah, now it is. Yeah. I have been in the space of public policy, public advocacy for nearly, say, about 22, 23 years, working for some of the best companies in India. And about 2008, 6, 7 friends of ours, we got together and we figured out that the processes of public advocacy have changed for making a public policy in the country, but the advocacy professionals are not skilled for this. And there are new demands now being created on the people who are recommending how public policy is to be created, and nobody seems to be working on it. What can we do? So we formed this small motley group called the Public Affairs Forum. It started off as an informal group of people who said, we will promote ethical advocacy on public policy formation. And in about 4 or 5 years of operations, this group grew to some 110 members of some of the top-notch leading companies in the country, public practitioners. Thank you. Yeah, this is much better. Thank you. And then we formalize this as a forum, and today it's a up and running forum. Suggest you have a look at pafi.in, pafi.in for the kind of people and what the kind of work that they do. 2-3 things we figured out in this. The processes of public policy, and I'm talking of macro public policy, I'm not talking of individual sector-oriented. What should be the process the country follows for laying down such policies? Who should be a stakeholder invited for discussion? Whose viewpoints should be heard? Whose viewpoints should be chewed upon? So the whole process is like this. Let's say, I'm just throwing an example. There are beauty parlors running all over the country. Is there need for a regulator for them? Should there be a law of who will set up a beauty parlor? So this entire thing will follow through, let's say, a 4-stage process. The first is there is an awareness, whether there is need to create something like this, whether there should be one. The next stage is a public debate. And when I say public debate, I'm talking of an informed debate, sensible debate. There will be some heat as well in it, but an informed debate. And the third stage is where you will have a draft policy or a recommended policy or whatever. And then that's out in public domain for so-called experts to give whatever their input, including the people who feel that they have been ignored or who have not been part of this. And the fourth stage is where then you actually come into policy formation, whether it's a law or rule or whatever, but you lay down a policy. Now, at each of these stages, a professional is involved in advising the people who are going to take a decision. So the question is, where is this advice coming from? Is it from a good, clean source or a dirty source? By a clean, disinterested source? Let's say, another thing could be, should GM foods be allowed in India or not? You are in the process of forming a policy. Where is the debate? Who's talking? On what basis are they talking? This is a scientific subject. Your and my opinions really may not hold much standing there. So issues like this then get resolved. Now, the public advocacy professional then has to be a trusted person. He cannot be somebody who's giving you dirty advice. Point is, where is this knowledge residing today in the country? The people who are going to frame a policy, they're going to get their inputs from. Are our MPs open to receiving advice, inputs, even information from people? Are the policy makers willing to look at best practices? And who's going to feed them the best practices? So this is how the public advocacy space has emerged over the last 7-10 years, and that's how the role of the public advocacy professional has dramatically evolved in these years. Here's my starting comments.
I just want to add a few comments. Tabrez introduced BSA as an industry association that represents international software publishers. But one caveat to that is the large scale of investments that they bring into the market and the interest that they have in this market flourishing as a wave. So while I agree with some of my colleagues' comments in the fact that yes, policy formation and the policy dialogue has certainly evolved, and there's some departments that are definitely better at it, I would say, than others. The very start of public policy or the very start of creating a policy has always been to control an industry rather than allow it to grow and flourish. I think when we look at public policy, we need to look at it from an advantage India perspective, and it's not always from a very short or medium-term perspective. We need to look at what is the long-term gain for this market from that perspective. And then in that story, how do we bring all the stakeholders in play, whether it be an international company or be a domestic company? Let me give you a very specific example to the IT industry. and my colleague here, Renee, and I will probably talk about emerging technologies. Today, you look at the cloud computing space, you look at the cybersecurity space. There is great fear. There is the need for the government to control that space, and they are out there forming policies in this space. But the critical player in this space, which is the companies that are creating this technology, are often left out of the dialogue. Now, unfortunately, they happen to be also MNC companies, and the security perspective keeps coming in. And therefore, what my colleague says to the right is very, very important. How do we create an honest, trustworthy, and an open and frank dialogue? Because technology is today determining how policy is going to be framed. Today, yes, you may have a land acquisition policy that may happen in one framework, which is a traditional economy. But how do you deal with the economies of the future? How do you create the Make in India or the digital economy strategy? I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. I come from a background which has nothing much to do with, so we have just started. It's just a 4-year-old venture, but it seems as if it has changed a lot in this country. The way people used to think about traveling or commuting in a city, we have changed. So before coming to that, I just have a small thought about the policy makers and the policy. So our interface is the policy executionists, who are the civil servants and the government officials who are at the forefront, who are executing the policy. And I have a simple two-liner for them, which defines them very well, because I am a journalist and I see things from a different perspective altogether. What they believe is, अपनी मर्जी से कहाँ, अपने सफर के हम हैं, रुख हवाओं का है, उधर के हम हैं. Government officials, generally, those who are executing the policy, has nothing much to say in the existing framework of policy that they are implementing. I'll give you a simple example. In Karnataka, there is a traditional, you can say, radio taxi scheme, which was drafted in 1998, way back. And all the taxis which are, so I belong to a taxi domain, but interestingly, we don't own a single taxi. So we are not a taxi company, but we are a software company. So there is a perception issue that also we are facing currently with the policymakers. So I was talking about the scheme which was drafted in 1998. And till we came in picture, everything was fair, sound, everything was going fine. And one fine day, everywhere, the cabs which are using our sticker and our software were present on the road. And suddenly all those who were plying on the roads of Karnataka from last 10, 15 years found that, oh my God, I mean, there is something that have changed. All of a sudden, all my customers are gone. There is no one who would like to sit with us. And why that have happened? Because the cabs which are using our software can manage to ply at a rate which is just 50% of their normal traditional taxi in the city. And they've raised a challenge to us. They are saying, how is it possible? No, you can't ply below the rates. We went to the policy executionists, that means the transport authorities and all, and they said, they were clueless. Yeah, we can penalize you for charging more, but how can we penalize you for charging less? I mean, they have no answer to that. Similar kind of challenges everywhere in the country. So, we'll discuss during the discussion that, what challenges a policy maker and a policy executionist faces with the people like us who are, basically termed by media as the disruptors of the economy. We are actually, I don't use the term disruption, but I use the term collaboration. So, and we are streamlining the system. We are simplifying the system. I'm as simple as, the resources were there in the economy from 1970, there were these cabs were applying in the country. But nobody have ever thought that if we channelize this resource in a proper way, everybody's need can be solved, right? When the radio taxi schemes or radio taxi policies were framed, nobody ever thought, or nobody have even given a thought that, these could be a replacement to your personal car. So nobody need to buy a personal car but can use a taxi. Is it possible? So nobody have even given a thought to that.
and the policies are framed. So now the scenario has changed a lot. Now the policymakers are struggling with the whole new concept that how to control these low fare people. Earlier they used to control the high charging people. Now we are the low charging people, and now they are struggling that how to manage them, control them, because the establishment is challenged. What Jeshnani sir was saying, we have challenged the establishment, and let's see how far we have to go. We'll take it more during our discussion. Sure.
Thank you very much. A lot of thought-provoking articulation has come, which is the process issue, the understanding issue, the new emerging challenges coming from technology and things like that, the origin issue, the company, where company belongs from. So my next question is, many times I have seen that there is adversarial position emerged between government and business, between government and other stakeholder, whoever that could be. What is the solution for that? So the articulation I've been looking from all of you will be, what is the solution? Because at the end of the session, organizer will compile a report which will go to a large number of legislators, government bureaucrats and lawyers and judges. So what is the solution this session is proposing? So that's my question. Anyone can take
I'll take that.
Use this.
I was in fact hoping to touch on this. See, policy making in India has historically been based on the premise that industrialists are cheats, and government is the controller, the word that you use. You want to control economy. The NGOs always thought businessmen are cheats. The businesses always thought NGOs are rascals. They're trying to make money, delay projects and stuff. There was mutual distrust all around. There was no possibility of a sensible or a clean, open dialogue among these stakeholders. I have been in this space long enough to see that there is a change happening. There is a shift. Today, large corporations, I'm talking of large corporations and large NGOs, international NGOs, are able to sit across a table and reach a common ground on certain, shall I say, inconvenient issues. Regulators are a new animal in the whole thing. 7-10 years back, there were no regulators. Now, a regulator today is different from a government. Regulators today are also understanding that businesses need to function. They need some kind of enabling environment to grow. A typical case would be if you were to look at your antitrust or competition commission and see how in certain cases they've come very hard on businesses, but in certain cases they've ruled amazingly business-friendly decisions have come through. So the monkey in the whole pack still is the federal structure in the country. What you are seeing is a shift of mindset in the central government. You travel into the states and you still see that there is that old mindset still existing. It's not all hunky-dory at states. They still look at businesses as cheats. You have any proposal on anything, they will look at what is your interest. You two competitors were to join in on a let's say, supply issue or a product and approach the government, they will see is there cartelization. Their first thought is not that you are probably doing something benign. NGOs, the smaller ones, especially those which have political people backing them, are still problem creators. They don't understand or appreciate the business issues. Their thinkings are not tuned to it. But if you were to deal with international or large NGOs, you will see that they understand business needs to be done, but can we do it responsibly? That is the bottom line with them.
So anybody else want to take it? But I want to add one more complexity. The origin of company, many times there is a deep distrust against multinational companies. Though they are registered as per Indian law, they serve Indian customer with the best technology product they have. They are more compliant sometimes, though it's a controversial statement, but very compliant. So I'm adding more complexity here.
Tabrez, I'd just like to briefly add here. I think what you just mentioned. So there is actually a very thin line between profit and profiteering, and that is where ears and eyes of a lot of regulators and government agencies stand up. So, and that definition is blurred across the world. It's not just in India, it's across the world. There are things that are interpreted either ways. But what is actually good about the Indian system is that a free judiciary provides that opportunity to dispute, contest, and stand for the right thing. What we probably need to do is, just as was discussed previously, is that we need to keep moving forward. So even today, a lot of communication that we get from the government, from the regulators, they quote case laws which came out in 1980, 1975, related to profit and profiteering, and things have progressed far beyond that. But somewhere down the line, we are not adapting ourselves in the reformed system. And that's where I think we need to move forward to have new case laws, contest the things which we feel are not right, so that they come out to the judiciary, new case laws get formed because of the contest and so on. And I think that's an iterative process which will take time, but somewhere we need to raise questions as to whether what we are doing is right, whether if you're quoting a case law which is from 1980, whether that's the right thing to do or not. Can we move forward and have something better in our hand as a tool?
My experience has been that in certain areas of public policy, there is a lot more emotive build-up, around a subject, and often you would see that it's not necessarily that the arguments put forward by various interest groups are logical. So you have to give a space for that as well in the public policy making. Now, having said that, I find that often even government departments would put up, would welcome, actually, put up is a wrong word, welcome the kind of din that is created by certain NGOs to further a public policy goal that the government wants to follow. While that's legitimate because that's like part of the stakeholder mapping, I go back to what Yolynd said about the actual player who is contributing. There is an aspect of who is creating that value and who is it being used. Ultimately, the government represents the consumer. So there has to be a balance, and that balance must be based on facts, on law, international commitments, and that is often lost sight of. I think last week, I saw this huge din being created by visiting professors of law and different companies under some, innovation, IP Owners Association. The din created was that they shouldn't be meeting anybody in government or whoever they were trying to meet. Now, that sort of, anger, and in such a public manner is uncalled for, because there must be space, whether it is in, face-to-face government meetings or in a public forum, where a debate can be held for different points of view to coexist. You could differ, but it cannot get dirty. So I think that space and that ability to kind of have a mature debate is still, in some areas that one practices in.
I think a lot is said by people around the table. But really coming back, many times I get asked a question in terms of what is it I do? And it's very hard to describe it, but actually there is a simple word. We are all lobbyists at the end of the day. We don't like using the word, but we are. And it needs to be accepted, like Krishna Sharma said, that there are going to be different views put to the table. The profession per se needs to be accepted, and it needs to be made transparent, and the contributions to political parties, including in that, needs to be made transparent. We come, and like Tabrez has also referred, when we work as MNC companies, we have strict FCPA norms in terms of how we engage government. Our expenses to even entertain a government official is, capped at 1,000 rupees, which I don't know how we managed to do that. But it is a transparent and it is a controlled field to enable this technical dialogue to be created. And therefore, you will see these admissions being made by MNC companies in their public reports, that they have engaged with governments, this is the amount that has been spent. And I think that needs to be accepted in India. That we are a flourishing democracy today. We should be entertaining thought of a different type, especially when we intend to be leaders tomorrow. And this is the only way we can do it, is if we make this profession public, transparent, and open for all to participate in. Okay, we can do that. Yes, yes.
So here I have a thought, which is like, whenever we discuss with the government at various forums, the biggest challenge that I see at these forums is, we are not exactly doing a backward integration of the problem and not going to the soul and heart and soul of the problem, and we are just addressing to the current scenario. I'll give you just a simple example, the last mile connectivity that currently the metros facing, right? After deboarding a metro train, to go to your home, you are still struggling either, for an auto rickshaw, for a cab, for a simple rickshaw, or there is a feeder bus that was started by metro only. So last mile connectivity is one, and I'll connect this thing with the most ambitious project that Mr. Modi has taken up, which is the Jan Dhan Pariyojana. That means everybody should have a bank account. Now these two things look absolutely different. And let me just connect those things and, put forth a new perspective to the whole thing. They are currently forcing people to open account, you can say they are motivating them, okay, have a bank account, you will get insurance cover and all. But do you really think that it will work? A person at the lower strata is not interested to have bank account or keeping his money in bank, because he wants to see the cash in his hand and he wants to use it wherever he can. Let me connect it with the last mile connectivity. We all are using a metro card, which is used in the metro system everywhere. If we have some financial instrument which can be used seamlessly across the transportations, I'm sure it will solve a lot of problem for everybody. And that last mile connectivity is something which is the lower strata struggle every day. For example, a lady who is working in somebody's house has a debit card, which is not a swipeable but a magnetic card, which if she can use in an auto rickshaw to go anywhere, she would be more than happy to keep the money in his bank account, because she then knows the value of that card. And similarly, connecting those systems together. And this will act as the last mile connectivity solution also, because when you deboard from a metro, that card will be used again as a payment mode, and you will use the available system. So for example, like Ola, we are experimenting the same thing. We have started auto rickshaws in Bangalore, so now you can even from the application call an auto rickshaw. And we are going to connect that auto rickshaw with a cashless payment system. So while traveling in an auto rickshaw, you may need not to pay. Your online account will automatically be deducted. And this is something which gives you the feel of having something really innovative first, and second, this will give you the freedom from this will give you the freedom and make you understand the value of that specific cashless transaction, and people would be more interested to have a bank account. So if Jan Dhan Yojana is connected with, it has some innovative solution like a card with without a magnetic strip but a touch and go kind of thing, that will, motivate a lot of people, because then they can, draw value from that card, right? And this is a simple and thinking loud thing. We have just started a pilot. Maybe we go a long way, but we need policy support. So there are so many policy stumbling blocks in this. Reserve Bank of India policy for the cash instruments, which is still, in its evolving stage. It has yet not evolved. So these kind of discussions and examples will definitely help government to, take things forward.
I wanted to contradict you to the extent that yes, you were unhappy being called a lobbyist. I would say no, actually you shouldn't be. Are you anybody unhappy being called a lawyer, a chartered engineer, a chartered accountant? No, it's a profession. You should be unhappy about being called an unethical lobbyist. So this is a fine line. Any profession that you take up, you do it, deliver things ethically, it's a perfectly fine, logical profession. Going one step further, in India, lobbying happens, it's been happening for donkey's years, it's been shady, carry a box kind of a fellow who you know, whose uncle you employ, whose auntie you do. So that was the kind of stuff. Now, imagine a situation, there are registered lobbyists who register with whatever is the regulatory body, and they say that yes, I am registered, I am lobbying on A, B, C subjects. My annual spend has been X rupees broken up like this. My net achievement on this topic has been X percentage. If you were to file an annual return, something like this, wouldn't it be more transparent than somebody's uncle delivering a bag of currency to somebody? European Union does that. There is so much of pressure on the members of parliament that a member of parliament who interacts with an unregistered lobbyist is subject to press scrutiny. He says, why did you go and meet this fellow? So if I have to ask for an appointment with the member of parliament, I have to give my registration number is so and so. So he knows he's talking to a person who signed a code of ethics, a code of performance, whatever. His company is liable. My company gets registered. The US follows the model, the company is registered. So it's a matter of how you perceive the profession, where you carry it, how do you end with it.
Thanks.
Just to make it lively.
But I agree with you.
So I'm tempted to put two more questions, okay? And I have to open the floor for question from audience, so I'm merging these two questions, okay? So it's excellent to see that the new project, for example, Jan Dhan, it's excellent project, and it's a unique characteristic of India is coming out by this project by Mr. Modi. India still has 20 million credit card, and we have 450 million debit cards, okay? What it reflects is Indian by nature are more saving oriented, and this project is helping Indians to remain saving oriented, and at the same time, of course, there is a banking inclusion, which is again noble thing. But my next question is, most of the policies are played out in state at center level, because administration is at local level. What are the challenges we all face, and most important, what is the solution? This is question number one. Second question I'm adding is, again making it very difficult, there should be efficient cost benefit analysis or some kind of review on what is the good policy we had and what is the bad policy, and how effectively, quickly we can undo some of the bad elements of policy. Though it's very tough, very difficult. In retrospective, when we look at things look quite differently, but what's the thought? So anyone can take it.
Yeah, Tabrez, I think from what you mentioned, health policy comes first to me as an example where there is a split So health being a state subject, all the decisions related to health are taken by the state governments. But all the funding, because health also being more of a philanthropy based or a donor based action, funds have to come from the center, or if the state is revenue rich, revenue surplus, then they can come from the state. So there are these two power centers. One is the financial power center and the second one being the policy power center, if you can classify them like that, for taking any decisions related to health policy. What that does is it tends to create two different processes. The first one at the state level. So the state would go ahead, and depending on what the needs, the health needs of the state are, they would formulate the policy. And then, so again, since it's incremental, it comes with its own set of problems. And then they would look at the finances, whether we have the adequate finances to run this policy or implement this policy through an implementing rule or an order. More often than not, the states do not have the fund, and they depend on center for support for running the state health policy. What that does is it makes it again dependent on the state's own, the center's own priorities, and whether health is a priority or not, nobody knows. Very often it's not a priority for the center, because if you look at it, even to this date, the central expenditure or overall health expenditure from the government is 1.2%, which is minuscule if you compare it to other countries. Even countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they have higher proportion of GDP spent on health. So then with this disconnect, it's again the better off states who have surplus revenues, who can invest into health, they have better health indicators, while those which are anyways poor, they have poorer health indicators, and it's a vicious cycle, and it becomes difficult to break that. A lot of times, things like the National Rural Health Mission, they were formed to address those issues, looking at states which have poorer health indicators and giving them additional financial inputs. But again, this disconnect has its play in between, and whatever allocation is done at the state level, then it gets spent not very effectively at the, whatever gets allocated at the center doesn't get spent very well at the state. So this measurement, what you mentioned, Tabrez, is very important in the whole process. Whether what we have planned is the right thing, what is it, have we done a cost-benefit analysis of that, what is the effectiveness of any strategy. If you're talking about generic drugs, are they going to provide value and also safety to the people at large? So these are things that while they get decided at the state, they also need to be vetted at the center. And there a coherence is required. And unless both of them are aligned to each other, decisions don't get taken. And finally, who suffers is the final beneficiary, or the patient goes to the health system and doesn't find the services there.
No, just to add to this discussion, because that's something that I very much live. I think it's not necessarily that the richest states in India has the best health outcomes, because though you could actually divide India into two very distinct groups of western and southern states, and northern and eastern states being absolutely a divide. But I think governance is really the key differentiator. For example, Kerala doesn't have the highest GDP, but all indicators of human HDI indicators are high across board, if you compare that to even Maharashtra and Gujarat. So it's an observation that I thought I should put on the table, because we often struggle with that, is that the money, resources is a differentiator, or governance is a differentiator, and our conclusion is that the governance is a differentiator rather than how resourceful a state is. Now, having said that, and coming back to the issue you flagged, I think that again I would stick to this division that I made, that look at, say, regulations in the FDA. I'm taking the larger, not just drugs, even food. You will see that the regulators have actually been very strong in the last decade or so, or strengthened, I wouldn't say it's very strong, strengthened in these states, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra to some extent, Gujarat, Rajasthan. Rajasthan has recently picked up. But you won't see the same, vibrancy in the northern and the eastern states. Completely, lacks. Therefore, the way you would work in the eastern and the northern states would be fairly, different from the western and the southern states. And this I'm just giving an example of FDA because that's both, it's a concurrent list. So policies may be made by the center, allocation may be made by the center, but implementation is at the state government's hands. Now, I think that, again, wrapping up comments that I made, if there's something that I would like to leave behind is that in the public policy space, there is need for, skill sets. Very few, law firms do this as a matter of, course. Abroad, you'd see there's an extension of any law firm, whether it is Europe or it's US, it's an extension. And I think, that going back to Mr. Batra's comment, it needs domain knowledge. It needs skills which are interdisciplinary. It needs honesty and the courage that, Mr. Jetmalani talked about in the morning, to stand up and stick to what you believe in. You espouse a cause you believe in. And these are things that I think are not as well ingrained, as it should be in our public policy law intersection. As a law firm, I can tell you, we've been working on this for about 15 years, different sectors. So it's domain knowledge expertise, policy, and understanding of the law. So it is a very intellectual process at one end, advocacy, education, and interaction with the government. So I think it's all in one. It is not something that I agree with you. There should be no embarrassment to say that you lobby for a cause, because you do it with all these premises that we talked about.
Just a very quick comment, on when you're talking about the state and central play of issues. We look at many states competing with each other for FDI investments, and you generally see it played out in the media. And what we forget to see is what is the credibility of the country at large. And that is where the central government is really the custodian of that credibility. So, I know of many companies that will go in, invest, and, states are looking at bringing in new investments. They forget about the old investments, and they forget about managing those investments. And then things go bad. And where does the central government really come into play? You look at, and as a parallel example, you look at when World Bank or you look at ADB Bank coming in giving funding, they're completely controlled in terms of how their money is spent. And that perspective should be held with the central government. They are responsible for the brand called India. And that is the brand, you're not selling brand Maharashtra, brand Tamil Nadu, you're selling India. And when you're bringing companies in, and that's where they need to be more in control with, especially because a large amount of fundings are still going into the state from the central levels.
That is not the central money which is going. Yeah. It's a money raised at the state, pulled into the center. So it's not my money versus their money.
But it's more about controlling the way states manage investments.
I'm happy about this animated, active discussion.
Yeah,
that's the best way to give back to audience. Yeah.
I would like to add one point here, and would like to again talk about simplifying the procedures. Recently, what government did with service tax, they've issued a negative list. Issuing a negative list helps a lot because then it simplifies the whole thing. Anything and everything which is service will be taxed. It's as simple as that. There are only 31 things now which need not to be service tax. Apart from that, anything and everything under the sun will be taxed as a service tax. So, introducing a negative list identifying the subjects and which needs regulators or administration. Apart from that, let market decide its own course, because that will also solve a lot of problem for the government. This new government is very entrepreneurial in nature, and they are looking forward for new investments from the international players. But the biggest stumbling block for international players to come in India is the red tapeism. There is administration, there is regulator, there is a lot of stumbling blocks everywhere, wherever they go. So my personal example is, when we talk to transport department at the center, they are very happy to hear our story. When we go to the state transport authority, they are still happy to hear, but they have some doubts. And when we deal with the people on ground, they don't know what they have to say to us, but they are really confused. And they haven't opened the Motor Vehicles Act from last so many years, and now we have forced them to open the Motor Vehicles Act and see the sections. Oh yeah, you are right, but still, there is something which is stopping us to help you. I don't know what. So these kind of comments are there. We are still struggling with them, but only thing which I feel is government should simplify the procedures, make as many negative lists as possible.
So thanks. So let me open for the question from floor. Please identify yourself and also tell whom your address is in the question. Mike, please.
Thank you, Mr. Tabrez Ahmad. In fact, to talk about I'm K. Mahesh, I'm Special Commissioner Industries in Delhi government. And I think we should have a government representative in your panel when we talk about involving all the stakeholders and talking about public policy. But anyway, I have a few comments to make. Number one is that the government is moving. We are moving, to transparency through the RTI, through the Public Services Delivery Act. A number of measures have been initiated. But the corporate sector also needs to be transparent. In fact, we have the RTI. What prevents RTI being applied to the corporate sector? That can be worked out. What could be worked out as things which could be covered under the RTI covering the corporate sector, and things which should not be disclosed in the corporate sector. Those things can be worked out. But nothing prevents us from moving to have to include the corporate sector under the RTI Act. South Africa has done that. And that will also enrich kind of public policy. It will give us a lot of inputs. That's number one. Number two, the problem in public policy, as I see it, there's a problem of evidence-based public policy. Now, that's the key. If Britain has not suffered because of its integration with the EU monetary union, it is because the civil servants gave 21 reasons why UK should not be part of the European Union monetary union, and that has saved Britain. If Margaret Thatcher lost the elections, again the civil servants had advised her, look, these are the reasons, don't enforce this tax, blah blah. She did not, and she lost the election. What I want to say is there is a need for evidence-based policy making. Now, if you need evidence-based policy making, you also need to have an interface with the research bodies, to have a kind of interface with the think tanks. On every issue, you need to identify which are the think tanks in health, in education sector, technology sector, and you got to have that kind of an interface to have informed decision making in public policy. But does India have that kind of research institutions? If you look at her IITs, look at her IIMs, what is their global ranking? We don't have a very strong kind of research-based bodies in this country, and because of that, we lose a lot of our ranking. That's the second problem as I see it. Quite often our public policy, they are challenged in the courts because they are contrary to law, contrary to rules. That's another problem. And even if you look at the academic world, the universities, teaching of public policy, since you don't have a representative from the government, I thought I must flag these issues. So just give me half a minute, I'll wind up. If you look at academic institutions in this country, the universities, public policy is not taught the manner in which it should be taught. It's not part of the curriculum. It's not part of the course. University has started that.
Yes.
And the threat to the public policy just for a sec, is from the corporate sectors are having the research institutions and they are serving their own interests. The Reliance has couple of these corporate giants and you can't compete with them. They come out with glossy report.
You made very excellent points, evidence-based and institutional.
Stop then, Mr. Tabrez.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Let me have one more question.
But
one more question.
you are eating into the another panel's time. If he permits, I don't have any objection.
As organized. But before that, I have got excellent suggestion that today is 26/11, Bombay. We should remember all those who died, all those who suffered. So I suggest 1 minute, 1 minute का मौन रख ले, okay? So.
Thank you very much. You will get more than 1 minute. May I request Sujit Ghosh to present memento to Mr. Tabrez Ahmad? I'm sorry, but I don't have a choice. Can you bring next? Next.
Yes, look here. Hello. Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Arvind.
Yes. Please look here. Hello.
Krishna.
Thank you.
Mr. Krishna. Miss. Miss Krishna. Mr. Dr. Gaurav Arya.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Krishna. Yes.
Mr. Rajeev Batra. Now Mr. Avinash. Okay.
Yes, look here. Hello. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, panelists. And I now request Mr. Sujit Ghosh for his next panel. Is that here?